Hi, my name is Winsley, and welcome to my video covering 3 fantastic changes in the Wolf 1.2 update for Age of Wonders 4. While we did get some updates last week in the 1.1 update, I found that a lot of them weren't as interesting as the ones in this one, so I wanted to make a standalone video where we could look at these changes and just discuss them in detail. The first one has to be the most interesting one. They discuss how they've decided recently that they wanted to remove leadership clash and that they're going to be revisiting this topic at a later point in time. It sounds like a lot of people were not a fan of the leadership clash mechanic. If I go here, you can see that basically it would lead to clashing egos if you put lots of heroes in the same army, which would lead to them getting less morale and less experience, which made them just generally harder to use. And I remember seeing pretty early on that somebody created a mod that basically undid all of the effects from that if you had enough heroes in the army. If you just had two, I think the side by side effect wouldn't be enough to overcome the clashing egos. But once you got to two extra heroes, I guess 3 heroes in an army, then you'd be fine at neutral. And then after that, it just get more and more powerful. I really like this idea, and I would kind of like to see a faction that leans into this kind of hero heavy play style, and maybe if that was implemented, that could come out at the same time they come up with a hero nerf that people find reasonable. I was thinking about this a little bit, and I think a lot of the multiplayers were finding that the nerf to getting heroes and using them together was just not enough. They were able to just pump them out without too many economic penalties. So the changes didn't seem like it was far enough for competitive, but it was also too dramatic and drastic for the single players, especially when you consider that the AI didn't have to deal with the clashing egos modifier. They could just stack all their guys in one army, and it didn't really illustrate to newer players that the clashing ego was coming from the fact that they were putting all of their heroes in one army, because the AI just could outright ignore it. It seemed close to right, but not quite right. And I really want to see heroes get weaker. So I hope that we can see a new change relatively soon, one that people will all around be happy with, or as happy as you can make them. It's hard. You got to compromise a little bit. Now, they also did a stream where they polled people about whether or not they liked or disliked clashing egos, which I found a bit abnormal. They don't usually do streams after an expansion comes out, so they seem to be using that as an opportunity just to get a little bit more player feedback, specifically on this nerf. So yeah, I think that it was obviously something that was very important to them, and they're probably hearing a lot about on like the forums and maybe on reviews. Like sometimes people just review bomb if they don't like a new mechanic. So I think taking that out of the game probably makes sense from just like a marketing point of view. The next thing we have here is basically they implemented a AI hero recruitment cooldown, which scales based off the difficulty that you're playing on, from 5 turns on very easy to 1 turn on very hard. So they'll just have a slightly less heroes if you're playing on harder settings, but if you're on some of like the easier settings or like the average settings, the more normal settings, you should start to see less heroes thrown your way as quickly. You'll probably see them eventually. They're just on a bit of a cooldown, but I think that that could lead to you not seeing like 4 heroes in a stack just coming at you on turn 20 or 30, which is pretty scary. Heroes are very powerful. The next thing that they mentioned here is basically Conjure Animals will now be a spell that only appears after you have completed your first Tome of Magic. Getting that really early was super good for both fighting another player and for just clearing potential, because conjuring in another unit meant that your guys didn't have to take as many attacks from the enemy, and you had another way to deal damage to an enemy. So it was pretty good in auto combat and amazing in manual combat. You couldn't quite trust as much in auto combat, but still was better than not having that spell. All the other spells are just not on the same level as Conjure Primal Animal, and I'm glad they didn't increase the cost, because I feel like the cost is about right. It's pretty expensive. It should be pretty expensive. Now that's pretty much everything here that I wanted to talk about. There are a few other things in the fixes that we could highlight, and looking at the time, we do have enough time to talk about a few other really great things in here, like how they changed the AI so it can actually conquer the cities after the walls have been breached. I've seen this a few times recently where they get through a city, but they don't actually take the city, they just kind of hover over it. And that was happening with marauders and rulers. It wasn't just marauders, it was like actual full-on rulers that weren't conquering the cities. Another interesting fix or change that they made was to the factions. If we go down here, we can see that they made crocodiles, mammoth, and elephants have the right amount of movement. I don't know what they were doing before, but now it should be what they're supposed to be doing. And this issue was something that I heard some people complaining about, being not able to turn something into a farm for the saber-tooth primal culture was pretty bad because the saber-tooth were already limited to less forests, or at least that's what I heard from a lot of people. So just not having the ability to switch things around to a farm meant that you were even more limited in getting access to things like boosts. But you know, you could plan around it if you were aware that was happening. Next, we have something about the units. If we scroll down here, they made it so enfeebling Howl no longer affects friendly units. That's a pretty good change. Being able to just use that AoE more freely means that you don't have to worry about making your own units weaker. They also changed the mistlings, which is pretty interesting. The mistlings were being able to teleport after a retaliation, so if you'd run up to them to try and like lock them into place and attack them, they could retaliate and move 3 units back, or 3 hexes back, kind of like the Primal Darter's disengaging shot. And I think that people were just saying that's too good. You can't lock them into place with melee attacks if their retaliation throws them far away from your melee units. Um, but you know, you could always try flanking them. There were strategies people could have implemented. I agree. I think this was a little bit too strong for the mistlings. Mistlings are good enough as is. They made some fixes to multiplayer. If we go down a little bit, or no, multiplayer's here. They made it so that we don't have as many crashes when combat ends, and yeah, something else about combat leading to crashes. They also changed Ritual of Alacrity. I forget where that was in here, so let's just search Alacrity. Alacrity. Right here, world map. They made it so that that no longer removes your production, which I think was not the end of the world for barbarians, because barbarians were just generally a very efficient faction, but it was definitely not working in its intended. Clicking the Rituals of Alacrity button wasn't supposed to clear your production, but it was, so it's really nice to see that they implemented that change. They also made it so that there was an issue with non-visible reinforcement armies not joining in combat. Walker, Walker, they changed it. Where is it in here? I definitely saw it in here, but it's the visible one, so we'll just, yeah, non-visible reinforcement armies will now join combat, so you can't use the Tome of Mists to just make it so reinforcement range isn't a thing you have to interact with. So yeah, there was more than just 3 fantastic changes. I just wanted to highlight those 3 at the very beginning, and I'm glad that we had some time to go through some of the others here. I'll see you around. Have a good one.